Parliament resumes for its first sitting week. With a new government, Labor can prepare for a bit of a battle with the Greens on further and faster emission reductions. They have a focus to stop any new carbon-intensive resource projects and will attempt to block any new federal funding of existing coal and gas. Joining me live is the leader of the Australian Greens, Adam Bandt. Adam, a week is a very long time in politics. So what has happened in the last week? What is your position at the moment? Has it changed?
So the Greens party room has met and they've authorised me to commence negotiations, formal negotiations with the government with the aim of seeing if we can improve and pass this bill. We've laid out our areas of concern. Obviously, the target is too weak, and it's not just us who's saying that. Pacific Islanders are saying that. We know that this target is consistent with more bleaching of the reef, crop failures, worse fires and floods. But there are other issues with the bill itself, and one of those is making sure that this bill is a genuine floor, that you can't go below this proposal. Another is making sure it's not a ceiling, that it'll be easy for governments that want to act. We want to make sure that it actually, at the moment, doesn't really compel the government to do anything, and that's something we've said needs to be fixed. But one of the big issues is around coal and gas. And we don't want to be in a situation where we're negotiating legislation on a Monday, potentially passing it through Parliament, only to find out on Tuesday that the government is going to open up new coal and gas projects that would blow even that weak target out of the water. And it's this question of coal and gas. I think we can probably have discussions either now or over the next 3 years about how quickly we get out of existing coal and gas. But I think most people would agree you don't make the problem worse by opening up new coal and gas. You don't put the fire out while you're pouring petrol on it, and it's that's a key issue for us.
Well, let's start with what I think might be the easier bit, the floor v ceiling in legislation. Chris Bowen, last I heard, said that's not his read of the legislation at all. So is this just as simple as a language tweak?
Look, this is a fixable problem, is a way that we see this. These questions of whether it's a proper floor, we have a different view. Whether it imposes a ceiling, we do think it has the capacity to impose a ceiling on a future government that might have a bit more climate ambition.
What does that mean? I mean, you want this to have teeth. We're talking about a 2030 target. Labor might not be in power by 2030. So what happens? You don't meet that target by 2030. What is the penalty in legislation?
Well, it's more about, we've got to go much more quickly. I mean, we've even had the UK Foreign Minister, the head of the Global Climate Summit, out here.
Do you want dates in there?
Well, no, it's more about saying at some stage the penny is going to drop for this government, for a future government, that they've got to do more. And as I say, we've seen the Pacific Islanders out there saying, oh, good start, but please, you've got to do much more. The rest of the world has moved on. We don't want legislation to be a brake on any future government that decides it will do more. If you have a change in composition in the Senate, for example, you have Pauline Hanson in balance of power in the Senate. We don't want someone like that having the whip hand and being able to say, no, the target is locked in law, you're not allowed to lift it.
That's how democracy works though, right? The Australian people vote for a Senate that they want an election time.
Well, we're passing laws, and the question is what is in those laws. And so we're negotiating laws at the moment. At the moment, the government could put in place or lift emissions target whenever it wanted. Our question is why put obstacles in the way of a more ambitious government in the future lifting the targets? Okay,
let's talk about the harder bit, the new coal and gas. What do you define as new? Because I'm thinking about two projects, Beetaloo Basin and Narrabri.
Well, we've been pushing very clearly to say where operations haven't commenced, they shouldn't commence, and that's been our public position. So even if, say with a Scarborough project, for example, off Western Australia, which is a massive, massive project, once that gets up and running, you're talking about the equivalent of about 13 to 15 coal-fired power stations running a year. That's got to stay in the ground. Now, work hasn't commenced on that, operations haven't commenced on that. Beetaloo Basin is even further back. In the Northern Territory there, you've got the equivalent of 68 years worth of Australia's pollution in all those basins. Beetaloo Basin alone could lift Australia's pollution by up to 13%. Now, that can't go ahead, both to meet our own targets and to have any chance of stopping dangerous global warming. Well, it's got to stay in the ground. This is the point the scientists are making.
But would you be open to an offset?
Well, you can't. You can't offset something that, and we don't need to. That's the question. We certainly can't do it in the time that we need to. And the thing about methane these big gas projects is that it's a much more toxic gas for the climate than CO2. And so scientists are screaming at us, saying, keep this in the ground. And it's not even not just the scientists. The International Energy Agency, quite a conservative body that represents all the energy producers, has said to meet net zero by 2050, which we think is too late, but even to meet that, you can't have any new coal or gas projects starting now. So there's the advice is crystal clear. Don't open these things up.
Let's get technical for a moment, because Narrabri is further advanced. Could you see a scenario where Narrabri goes ahead, supplies the East Coast gas market, but perhaps you draw your red line on Beetaloo?
Well, firstly, Australia doesn't have a shortage of gas, right? Australia does not have a shortage of gas. The driving factor behind this crisis that we're seeing at the moment is obviously the war, but also the fact that most of the gas gets exported, so often overseas tax-free. Is that part of your negotiations, perhaps, that you have an export quarantine? Well, at the moment, we're not even at square one, right? We're saying
but you're not taking that
we can't open up more coal and gas. At the moment, the government's saying, no, we want more coal and gas. That remains a point of difference.
Okay, let's talk about two other things quickly. Stage 3 tax cuts. The government, before the election, promised that they would stay in place. You don't like them though, do you?
Well, no, and we've been very clear about that. And let's remember the election result. It saw the Greens vote go up, Labor's vote go backwards, and the government's vote, now opposition's vote, the coalition's vote go backwards. I think people understand increasingly that these expensive tax cuts for the very wealthy are going to cost over $200 billion over the next decade. We don't buy the argument that there's got to be an October budget full of cuts because we're in a dire financial situation. At the same time, as the government saying it wants to go and give Clive Palmer a tax cut of $9,000 a year. Like, there is a way of saving the budget over $200 billion that could go to things like getting dental into Medicare to deal with the inflation crisis and cost of living crisis. Don't give these tax cuts out. And look, it will destroy Australia's progressive tax system. When someone on the minimum award wage is paying the same tax rate as a CEO on 200K, that is the end of the progressive taxation system in Australia. And this Labor government should not be the government that presides over the demise of the progressive taxation system in Australia, and we will be pushing that hard. Okay, finally, the cut in the fuel excise. What is your position on that? Should it be extended? Well, we'll wait and see what the government plans to do, but the real issue I think that shows is that for so long as we're dependent on fossil fuels, we're going to be dependent on things like whether there's a war overseas that a dictator launches. The best way to deal with that would be to give people some incentives to get off fossil fuels, and that the budget that's upcoming is a great opportunity for the government to give incentives for people to get off fossil fuels into electric vehicles. Richard Di Natale once said, I remember when he was elected as the Greens leader, he said that he wanted to make the Greens a little bit more mainstream. Are you of that same view? Where do you want to take this party, given your mandate? Our vote just grew at the election. More people voted Greens than ever before, and we've now got more representatives in Parliament than we've had before. Well, I think it's a couple of things. One is that we said very clearly the climate question's about coal and gas, but I think one of the things that we did this time at this election was offer an economic alternative. Right? We accepted and understood that the cost of living crisis is very real. It's having big impacts on people. And we put forward a plan that would make people's lives better by making big corporations and billionaires pay their fair share of tax. And I think that emphasis on economics, and we wanted people to understand that just as strongly as we'll fight for the climate, we're going to fight to make people's material lives better and address cost of living questions. I think that's part of the reason. Electricity bills while there's the transition, though. You know, the Greens, in my view, aren't offering a short-term, there's going to be some cost for this transition in the short term. Well, I think we're seeing at the moment the cost to people's hip pocket of sticking with unreliable and expensive coal, gas and petrol. We're offering the alternative that will make not only... switch them off tomorrow, though. Well, we've got to start today. We've got to start today, and we can start tomorrow by giving people subsidies and support. Are you honest about the cost? Well, we want to make the billionaires and big corporations pay their fair share of tax to help meet that cost. 27 big gas corporations, $77 billion of income, not 1 cent in tax. Let's start making those big gas corporations that are holding this country to ransom pay their fair share of tax and use it to make everyday people's lives better. Okay, Adam Bandt, I've made you very late for your media conference. I do apologise. There'll be a lot of journalists waiting outside. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.